Hello, and welcome to Age of Wonders Planetfall. My name, as always, is Orange, and today's video is going to be a bit of a polyglot. I didn't have just one topic that I could come up with over the week to focus on, so today's video is going to kind of be a few smaller ticky-tack things. We're going to start out talking about perks on the hero screen. Once we get into the game proper and run through a turn or two, I want to talk about heroes and hero upgrades, and then I want to talk on a little bit more of a higher level about mods and what they can offer you. And if there's time at the end, I will give some of my opinion on Vanguard. Unlike Syndicate or Amazon's, I don't play Vanguard quite as much, so take my opinions with a little more of a grain of salt. But I can talk at least a little bit about how I think that they get played. So with that plan in mind, like I said, I'm going to start on perks. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this. I don't want to talk about everything individually too much because honestly, the perk screen is pretty well balanced in my opinion. I don't think there's anything here that is a must-take in every situation. And there aren't too many of these perks that are a absolute trap of if you take this, like, you are actively worse off. Even the worst picks on the perk screen, I don't think are enough to flat out lose you a game. As long as you're at least half intelligent about what you go with, you'll be doing fine enough. I don't think there's too much here that you can do to totally mess with your game plan here. So with, again, that in mind, as far as this is a slightly lower priority thing to need to think about when you start going into a game, looking at the backgrounds, all of these choices are okay. Everything from no background to the 2 points, I could see a world for most of these. That being said, there are certainly a couple background picks that I think are bad in the format I play. 1v1 simultaneous turns, and the reason for that is just because the games don't last long enough. You don't have enough time, or you can't hope to have enough time to guarantee you get value out of them. Skilled Diplomat, for one. You just don't tend to bribe armies because you just would rather fight them. So Fast Talker isn't very good. And Charismatic is only good if you end up with cities that aren't your starting race. And that's not super common in 1v1 in my experience. So Skilled Diplomat is a weaker choice there. But in longer games on bigger maps with more players, I could see this being okay. At least mostly competitive. The other one is Covert Operative. I just don't know if you really need the Secret Operations research cost buff too much. Typically, in the games I play, you want enough of tech into Covert Operations so that you have tactical operations points that are close to what your opponent has. You don't want to be sitting at 2 when your opponent has 8 or 10. But you don't need to be rushing to try to get down that tree for too much. But I'm willing to be proved wrong on that. Maybe someone knows of a build out there where, oh yeah, you got to get 4 techs down the covert operations tree so you can get this specific, the specific strategic operation that just lets you win the game, and you really want that extra covert strength to make sure it goes off. It's possible. I haven't heard of one yet, and I haven't ever really been able to theorycraft one. I haven't tried too hard. So I tend to think Covert Operative is probably not worth the 2 points it takes. I think Skilled Diplomat is more useful in Covert Operative, but neither one is particularly useful in my game formats. The other tech ones are fine, and Veteran is fine. Colony Supplement, I think, is probably the best balanced of all of these. None of these are an outright trap. None of these are particularly game-breaking. I do think that Data Repository is better than Energy Cache in the majority of situations, But I think if you're going for a hyper rush build, that 300 extra energy can absolutely be a strong help for you. And I could see a world where someone would decide I want the guaranteed energy as opposed to the a lot more variable use to random techs. Um, but none of these are bad. All of these are okay. And I have tried games picking every one of them and done okay. Commander loadout is probably the second best balanced one. I think that assault equipment is weaker than these other two just because I think that for your hero, you well, first off, it doesn't really matter what you get from these because you will have access to other weapons in the game if you want them. I often sell them, but that's my personal playstyle. I know there are people that really like getting weapons and really put a lot of thought into keeping certain weapons and that they think a certain weapon can really help them win the game. Again, I tend not to. I think the energy is often more useful, but none of these weapons really lock you into anything. What you're getting for this point is that top half of the screen here of the range specialist eye. You're getting those points that you don't have to spend later, and all of these choices are okay. The reason I like close combat and sharpshooter more than assault is because I think having a melee hero is a very nice thing to have early game for clearing. I think having a sharpshooter just scales better into the late game when you start fighting players. It's nice to have a sniper around. Assault gives you a shotgun or a shotgun-like weapon, one large damage that is relatively short range. And that's just not super useful either in the early game or in the late game. It's just not as strong. It's middle child syndrome. It doesn't specialize enough. So I don't ever take assault equipment. Basic equipment is actually fine, and in some cases probably just better than assault equipment. Again, you're losing out on the range specialist steady aim, but you get your point back that you can use to spend on something else. The other one here is between assault vehicle and support vehicle. I tend to think most assault vehicles are probably just better than the support APC or the Imperial APC. I'm willing to be proved wrong on that again. There are a couple nice handy tricks from the Imperial APC, and maybe in something like play by email when you can manual every fight, having that extra healing can really let you clear more consistently and more quickly in the early game. So maybe in that case you prefer the Imperial APC over the assault vehicle. But I think in simultaneous turns you'd rather have the killing power instead of the support vehicle. I'd have to check sometime on if the Imperial APC gives you a healing, like a strategic level healing, because if it does, then there are some races that would really like that. So, as I'm just talking to myself here, I may be convincing myself otherwise, but I really think the assault is just better than support in the majority of cases. But I don't think the support is so bad that it'll lose you anything. I think the support is closer to assault than the assault equipment is closer to these two. But even with that caveat, none of these are explicitly bad. I don't think any of these will lose you a game if you pick it. Vices are an odd one. The more I play the game, the more I find I just don't want to take any. And a lot of that is because I've settled into my preferred setup. And like I said before, I don't think there's too much here that's an outright trap that will lose you a game. So I don't want to spend the effort to optimize if I can drop this no problem because I can account for it elsewhere and make my strong points stronger and my weak points weaker. Because I just don't want to think about it that much. So I've tended to lean to just take no vice most of the time. But there is an argument for many of these that they're okay. I do think there are a couple in here that are really bad. The worst one is probably Cruel. Full global unhappiness is really punishing. It slows everything down. It changes your tech approach because now you have to make sure that you get some happiness buildings, and you have to make sure that you build more than just the first building in your cities. It's just rough to deal with that extra unhappiness overall, and The cruelty bonus to your hero is not that great because it's only useful for the first 1 or 2 kills, only for your hero has to get. Um, it's just too restrictive. And for 1 point, what are you really buffing to that you can't just get by going to a nothing on one of these top ones? So I don't think Cruel is that great. I know people that swear by Kleptomaniac that think it's basically a free point. I am a lot more skeptical about it than many of the other players I talk to. I think 10 energy per turn is a significant downfall or a significant downside because that is, by turn 4, that's as much energy as a tier 1 unit. By turn 30, that's 300. Like, it hurts because it's not. In the early game, it hurts because it's money that you didn't have to spend to build units. And in the late game, it hurts because the 10 energy per turn is the upkeep for anywhere from 2.5 tier 1 units to like a tier 4. Like it's the upkeep that you're losing, and your army's going to be smaller than your opponent's. So I think the 10 energy is very punishing, and that you don't need the mod to start. It's not going to disproportionately help you clearing in many, not all, but many cases it won't. And again, I just don't know if the point. I don't need to get it from my Vice. Again, I know there are people that swear by it. I've heard of some builds specifically that if you game it right, you can guarantee that you get like a regeneration mod or something, which is extremely powerful. But I tend not to think it's a free point. I specifically have to consider if I think it's worth losing the energy, and often I say no. For the -2 ones, I think Decadent is easily the most pickable of the three. 10 food, it takes a long time before that becomes really significant. Whereas 10% product, or 10% food, not 10 food. Whereas 10% production doesn't take very long for that to be significant, and 10% knowledge is a lot harder to overcome than the 10% food. So my feeling is Decadent's the best of these three. I do think that depending on who your race is and what your build is going for, I could see a world of taking any of these three. So all three of these are okay when compared to how bad I think Cruel is. But again, to reiterate for the nth time, I just don't really go for Vices. I just don't think it's worth it. I'd rather drop something in my Commander loadout or something if I really want to make sure I get one of these 2.1s. As far as where I sit as my just default right now, I go Veteran, Data Repository, and Close Combat. My logic there being that I like having a melee hero early. I think it makes clearing a lot more consistent. And if I'm going to do that, that means I only have 1 point for each of these two. And while a larger starting army and 2 extra population are both extremely powerful, I like having my hero, my leader, not die because I'm going to throw him out there as a melee unsupported, so the 10 skill points really can help with that. And then the 15% experience gain it adds up over the game. And maybe later in the video, if I remember to talk about it, or in a different video at some other point, levels matter, and they can matter quite a bit. And this experience is not just your regular units, it's also your heroes. So combat experience is a very nice boost that Veteran gives you. So having this locked in means I kind of want to get this because it's just better than Skilled Diplomat. And then of the Colony Supplement, you can high roll so well on the 2 random techs that it's hard to say no to that. And the low roll is not that bad. Almost every tier 1 tech is useful, and almost every tier 1 tech I think is useful for pretty much every game. You get something out of it. Not all of them are useful immediately, but I don't think there's too many that you take that you're like, man, I just will never need anything from this. The closest probably is if you get a weapons tech for the wrong weapon for whatever build you're going for. But even then, I think all the tier 1 ops are at least okay to get from your weapons tech. So you still have something that you can use. Even if you're not going to use it a whole lot, it's not been a total waste. So data repository I think is pretty powerful. And that's another reason why when I go for a close combat one, I could go no background and get one of these 2.1s, but because I think data repository is a little stronger maybe than the 1 point would signify, it's a lot easier to drop this to 1 and then just take veteran. So that's how I this is my default plan, but I certainly have builds where I will drop the equipment and then focus on one particular type of tech. For this game, it doesn't really matter, so let's just take, I don't care, let's just go Star Union Scholar and listen to the game talk for a second.
Strength to you, commander of the Vanguard Expeditionary Forces. Cryosleep missions allowed you and your ranks of outcasts and adventurers to escape your past and claim new worlds for the Star Union.
Okay. Let's hit start game. Take a quick look, quick discussion about my stout. Is there anything beyond the pale? Autonom. That's okay. That's not bad for Vanguard. But I mean, we won't finish this game out anyways. But I've been fighting my NPC early on a lot. So let's not do that for once. Let's do a really, really quick discussion as an aside of, if you're not going to immediately fight your landmark, which I honestly recommend you do. I think it's a very strong opening. But if you decide you're not going to do that, what are you looking for? In this case of my adjacents, I only have 3 choices anyways. One is my landmark. Otherwise, I have a research node or a food node. An early food node is very powerful, but an early research node is also extremely powerful. And specifically as Vanguard, I can't show it till I get my techs up, but I have access to an early doctrine that I think is very good that adds food to all of your cities. So this early food is a lot less attractive, and I think I would rather get the early tech. So on the assumption that I'm going to go for but I can't do that turn 1, whereas I can do the food turn 1. Let's... the terrain's kind of bad, too, because... if I go this way, everything is so much slower. So I think kind of by default, if I was in a real multiplayer game, I would be taking the landmark and then expanding into some of this better stuff to the north. But since I'm not doing that, or since I said I was going to do that, I'm going to go this way because there's a lot higher chance I'll be able to effectively keep clearing. And I will send my scout out just to see if that's true. And the answer is maybe not, unfortunately. Whatever, let's just do this and not worry about it. In which case I probably should have sent this scout out in a different direction, but that's okay. Again, I've been habitually making sure to get at least my first food, my first expansion to pop as quickly as possible, so I focus food. I really like to go turn 1 into a production building. We got a quality point, which is actually more useful than you think, even though I'm landlocked here. Being able to cross rivers quickly is very strong. And it's one of those things that's very strong. It's very nice to have, but it's very easy to forget or decide to never take that tech because you've got better things to do. So I don't mind getting that for free because I just never have to spend the time later on to get it. Subjugation ordnance, yeah, it's totally fine. Shredder bomb is fantastic. In fact, it's probably broken good right now. And flechettes will make my troopers a lot stronger in the early game. Let's grab that. Okay. Grab the Cosmite. Okay. So yeah, we have some clearing stuff here. We can grab... oh, yeah, we actually can clear towards our first Cosmite node. So yeah, we picked the right way. I have really bad luck with my early Vanguard clears. I'm tempted to pull my scout in, but this is a pretty weak stack. So I think we can just take it without any losses. Oh yeah, we didn't even take damage. Get a whole bunch of tech early, which is very nice. Okay, we found our other starting town. Pretty good go. Okay. So we want to talk about heroes first or mods. Let's talk about heroes first. because it'll lead into mods afterwards. So I don't think you can play more than one game, 1 or 2 games of Age of Wonders without getting at least a basic understanding of heroes. So I won't go too deep into it. I mean, obviously they're very powerful units, but why are they powerful, and what different ways can they be powerful? So my general view on heroes in multiplayer is that they are either the focus of your build, or you really don't care. Um, I I have heard and I have seen players do extremely hero-focused builds where their entire goal is to power level their hero, often, not always, but often, so that they can put that hero in a strong vehicle that they've teched into really early. By putting a strong hero in a strong vehicle, they are just beyond what most players are expecting to see at that point of the game, and that's their game plan to win, is to have one single unit just be better than what your opponent can deal with at the time that you have that unit. The other general way that people build out is to have a unit with the right mods that is just stronger than what your opponent can bring, or is a particular counter to what your opponent has. And in those cases, your hero matters a lot less. I mean, it's never bad, right? You always want a high-level unit that takes more damage than anything else, that deals a little more damage than most things, that makes the rest of your stack strong. But you don't need to get nearly as fired up about power leveling your hero in the latter case. And me personally, I almost always am playing that second situation of my builds. I don't really focus on hero builds. I just don't like playing the game that way. But I know there are people that do. And in either situation, it doesn't change a whole lot about what upgrades are good and why. So I'm going to be talking more from the perspective of, yep, I pick heroes to go in these general directions. That's not necessarily bad from the perspective of if I was a power leveler to get my heroes really strong. The basics don't change all that much, in my opinion. So the way I approach heroes is there's a couple different archetypes of hero. Well, no, let me do a quick discussion before I get into that. So heroes obviously have upgrades. You really can't play the game without understanding that and seeing that and knowing that. What you may not know is where these upgrades come from, if you're a more casual player. So you get a pool of upgrades, global hero skills, that you can see in the top here of the tooltip, that every hero gets. You also get a pool that every hero of a race gets, and then you have a pool from every hero that is associated with a certain secret tech that they get. There is a sort of maybe hidden pool of specific heroes that you can get later in the game, have unique upgrades that are just for them. Often they're actives, not always, but often they are active abilities. I think there's like an Amazon that has scan catalog and stuff like that, where special little perks like that are available. Typically, it doesn't matter all that much. When you're looking, like when you see a hero to recruit, really the only thing you need to be concerned about is the what secret tech he is, because that's really the only one that's going to be different for you. And I say that because in the games I play, the default, and I think it's just the game default for Planetfall, is that all your recruitable heroes are only of your race. I don't think that was the case in Age of Wonders 3, and I think in that game the default was any race, although I don't know what the hardcore multiplayer people used. They might have they might have locked it to race. But in Planetfall, the default is everybody's your race, so the only thing that's different from hero to hero is either the special little associated perk or their associated secret tech. And the reason that matters is because not every secret tech is created equal. There are certainly secret tech paths or secret tech upgrades that are just not as good as other ones. And that is, I think, probably the area right now. This is the area right now that is the worst balance in the game, as far as there are some hero upgrades that are absolute traps that you never want to touch. Um, and then there are some that you need to take because they're just that good. Um, that being said, other than the builds that are dedicated for heroes, that are dedicated to a hero, I don't think in general that you can make or break a game here. If your game plan isn't around a hero, you probably aren't going to lose the game based on how you upgrade your hero. So that discussion being completed, back to what I was attempting to say of there's 4 general archetypes that I see to build out a hero. You can either have a hero that is a close combat melee hero. You can have a hero that is a ranged specialist hero. You can have a hero that is a piloting hero. And you can have a hero that is a stack buffer hero. In general, by the time your hero hits level probably 10 or so, you probably can be 2 of those things. For your first 5 levels, you really probably can only focus on 1. And usually of the 2 you end up getting are going to be a stack buffer and one of the other types. Because once you become a close combat specialist, you really don't want to become a ranged specialist because you have to spend a whole ton of points to do what you're already good at, which is killing units. So usually then either you started out going for a stack buffing hero and then you're transitioning to also being a very good combat unit, or you started as a combat unit and then you transition into, oh, I also want my stack to be better. And so looking at the upgrades here, I think it's pretty self-evident for the most part which upgrades are aimed at what, right? Like Infantry Commander, obviously this is not making your individual hero all that much better, so this is a stack buff. And I don't want to talk about each upgrade in particular. I just want to leave it as when you are kitting out a unit for combat or non-combat, the real decision you have to make then is not so much of, okay, which things are associated with being good with my archetype. The real decision you need to be making when you get a hero is what archetype do I think I need right now. And that is often trivial. A lot of times it really doesn't matter because anything is good. But from a pure optimization standpoint, my opinion, relatively untested, or not thoroughly tested, but empirically tested from the games that I've been playing, is that typically my first hero, my commander, I want him to be strong enough in combat to help me clear consistently. But after I take maybe 1 or 2 combat ones, I will start transitioning him to be a better stack buffer. And that really just has to do with the way that I play the game. Like I said earlier, my build preference is towards having good units and not great heroes. So I would rather have my hero be less individually strong and have more strength contributed towards the rest of the units in the stack. So for me, I don't need my leader to be all that great of a combat unit by himself. Again, there are absolutely builds out there where your focus with your starting hero is to make him just destroy people and, ender of lives and the best combat unit he can be. So with your initial commander, you can go either way, and it's totally fine. With your second hero or your second hero that you get, you probably want to do the opposite. So if you took your commander mostly stack buffing, you probably want your second hero to be mostly combat. And I say that I guess I shouldn't say you should, because I really don't think it matters all that much. It's whether or not you think you're going to be able to have a second clearing stack out, or if you're going to have one really, really good stack instead of having 2 clearing stacks. just the way my games tend to play out, and again, this might just be a function of the builds I prefer to play. I often find that by the time by the time I would have a stack that my second hero can be clearing with, my third hero's up for recruitment, and so that third hero can be the one that is my second stack buffer. And so the second hero I get tends to ride shotgun with my leader just to make that stack get really good. It lets me have extra, because that stack is stronger, I can clear stronger things. They get more levels quicker, and so I end up having one hero that is very well buffed to make the stack good, and I end up having one hero that is very well buffed towards killing units. Um, I don't know if that's optimal. It might not be, but that's the way I tend to have it go. So my general rule of thumb is my commander starts out being mostly a stack buffer. My second hero ends up being mostly a combat. My third hero, which is the first hero that you get that starts with skill points, he gets kitted out towards being my second stack leader. And then the fourth and fifth, if we get that far into the game, are whatever I think I need at the time. Probably most stack leaders, but I can be flexible with that. Sometimes I think I just need a really strong unit. And again, many of the things I'm talking about in this video matter a little less. For any build that's not specifically focused on a hero, it really doesn't matter. As long as you pick one archetype and mostly stick to it to at least be good at that archetype, you're fine. Whatever that archetype is, I don't think it matters all that much. The biggest choice is probably just for your commander, because you want to ride the line to make sure you're good enough that you can clear consistently. So with that discussion being done, let's talk about mods. And I've certainly talked about specific mods that associate with specific builds. I haven't really, I don't think, taken a step back to just talk about mods in a generic sense. And I think that is a discussion worth having, because there are some details in mods that I think are very easy to overlook early on. And let's just start out by picking a mod. And I want to start by emphasizing something that I didn't really think about early on, and that I think is definitely worth knowing about, and it made me a lot better player once I understood it. And that is that this last line that just is kind of tacked on that says additionally something can be the best thing about that mod. Not for every mod. I'll even extend that to not for every mod type, but for the defense mods, one armor or one shield can be a big deal on the right unit. For the mods that are more offensive, 10% damage is less of a big deal, but even that can be unit dependent. For something like a shotgun or a sniper, 10% damage is a lot of damage. On repeating units, it tends to be a little less important, and what you care more about is the top half of the mod. But don't ignore what the bottom half says, because that does make a big difference about how you should think about mods and what you want them to do for you. Excuse me. And that ties a little into the discussion that I had when I was talking about tactical fights in general, which is that you want your units in the front to be proportionally more defensive than the units in the back. And a lot of what determines if a mod is offensive or defensive, obviously, is what this additionally line says. So without having to think too much, if you just right-click, additionally +1 shield, okay, this is a defensive mod, great. Additionally, +10 damage. Okay, then this is definitely an offensive mod. And that high-level look, that one-click look at it, is probably the first way you want to just think about your mods. And for any given unit, you want to say to yourself, well, how do I want my mods to be split on this? Do I think this unit deserves 1 mod, 2 mods, 3 mods? And if it deserves 3 mods, do I want all of them to be offensive? Do I want some of them to be defensive? How do I want that split to go? So that is the sort of thing that you should want to think about first, as far as what units are good, or what units are good enough to deserve mods in the build I'm building, and what mod archetypes do I want them to be filled with? Do I want defensive mods or offensive mods, and why? Once you've done that is when you start looking at the individual mods available to you, and you determine if you can fulfill your goal. So if I'm looking at something like Troopers, which are a decent mod chassis, because they're a range unit, relatively cheap. They do decent damage on their attacks, and it's a repeating attack, so they're a pretty good mod chassis. What am I looking for to put on this mod at that high level discussion? So as a co unit, a tier 1 unit, it's pretty hard to say I want 3 mods on every one of these, because in principle I should have better units further down the line. That if I have a set amount of Cosmite, because Cosmite is your limiter, it's really hard to have more Cosmite than you know how to spend. So if Cosmite is my limiter, can I justify building 12 troopers with 3 mods apiece? That's a lot of Cosmite on units that are just not as strong as some of the other stuff that I might want to build later. So I probably don't want 3 mods on these guys. I can certainly do 1, if it's the right mod, and if I can throw 1 mod on these guys to make them more powerful. And I can probably do 2. So if I want 1 mod, do I want that mod to be offensive or defensive? And the answer is probably defensive. My general rule of thumb is if I'm putting 1 mod on something, I probably want it to be a defensive mod. Just because if the unit only deserves 1 mod, that's probably because I just want the unit to exist, and I'm not trying to have that unit perform any specific task other than just existing. And if all I need it to do is exist so that it can use its abilities or hold the line, then what I need from it is for it to not die and still have the actions to do whatever I needed to do from existing. So if I think a trooper only deserves 1 mod because all I need is just filler units that can do a little bit of damage, hold a line, and be something for the opponent to kill instead of the units I actually want to have do stuff or survive, then what I want on a trooper is a defensive mod so that it can exist longer. If it deserves 2 or 3 mods, then I can start saying, well, maybe then I really want to focus purely on offense, and I want 3 offensive mods so that it's riskier, but it will kill what it's shooting at. Or the other way, if it deserves 3 mods, maybe I want something that's just such a tank that the opponent has to spend disproportionate resources to take it off the field. And so I want to just keep stacking the defense on it as opposed to stacking offense. And there's also units that are in the middle. Not as many. It's probably better to optimize either towards offense or defense, but once you start getting to there, then you might have to look at the mods available to you and say, well, I don't have 3 defensive mods worth using. Then maybe you have to say, well, I'm still going to spend this much into it. I might as well add the extra offensive mod so that it's defensive as I can make it, and then I'm adding a mod that, since it is so defensive, I can get more offensive use out of it, or vice versa. So again, if I'm specifically looking at troopers, and I've said, well, yeah, maybe I just want 1 mod on them, 1 defensive mod, what's available to me? Well, this is where you're looking to say, well, ammunition flechette, that's an offensive mod, that's probably not worth it. This purification field, well, it is a defensive mod. And it's a pretty good one. 1 shield is fine. And it restores 10 hit points. It can be this unit or an adjacent unit, only once per battle. Yeah, that's fine. That's a good emoji button. It's a free action. Otherwise, I have nanite injectors. And this is one of the reasons why I went with Vanguard Promethean, because we've got 2 mods that are serving very similar functions here. Um, and picking between the two is a somewhat trivial decision that's hard to make. Because both of them are obviously just better. Um, and if I'm only picking one, I can make an argument for either. Nano injectors is more health. It increases damage channels, or increases resistances for a while, so it's gonna really make that one specific unit be hard to remove from the board. Whereas purification field, yeah, it's less health. It doesn't do the resistance to damage, but it can be adjacent units, and that's could be very good if I'm trying to focus on having one strong hero or something, and my opponent's trying to remove it, and I say, well, no, I want to heal it from my other units so I can add more heals. The other important thing to note is purification field is a status effect clear, which, depending on what your opponent is doing, might be much better than increasing resistance to damage channels. So it's an important choice, but it's an arguable choice in either case. I think the more interesting decision is if I had a unit. Let's say I'm going to focus on bikes, which I can't actually build right now yet. But if I wanted to focus on assault bikes, and I said, well, I want my assault bikes to be very defensive, because they have to be a little aggressive in the field. They got to get up towards my opponent to use their best attacks. If I want 2 or 3 defensive mods on it, do I put both of these mods on, or do I just put one? And that is a harder question, I think, to answer than just which one of these two do I want. Do I want them both? Is a hard question. And at this stage in the game, I honestly don't know if there's an answer to that. I just don't think that there's been enough time played in the game that people have enough experience or that they've done enough provable math to be able to make that decision of, oh, is stacking these worth it or not? Because the reason you chose it was for the bottom half, the +1 armor. So if all you want is the +1 armor, that's fine. But at that point, you probably want either the stagger resist to make them stagger immune for the bikes, or you want the 20% harder to hit. So you're probably going to go with something like 20% harder to hit, and then one of these two instead of both. But those are the questions that I think need to be asked more so than, do I put a mod on this unit? You should know how many mods you want on the unit, and then choosing between the mods that you think you need, that the mods available to you, is the hard decision. So be considerate about how many mods do I put per unit, and then from there make the decision of, as best you can, of which mods fill that gap. Is there anything else to talk about? Okay, so the second discussion to have with mods is that you can mod units in the field to make them extremely stronger. However, there is a cost to that. If you build a modded unit, you are paying production. If you upgrade a unit, you are paying energy. Energy is a lot more flexible, but it's also harder to come by than production. So your plan, your hope is that you can build units with mods and not upgrade units with mods. Is this the stronger way to do it as the default? So if you're doing a rush build where you can't, where you know you're not going to be able to build the unit because you just need to build it when you have it, then upgrade it in the field, obviously that's one thing. But if you're not going for a rush build, your strong preference should be to build the unit with the mods and not mod the unit after the fact. So you do have an incentive towards not just hard teching towards the units you want, but you do have some incentive to be picking up mods when available, to be able to put them on units. Third discussion is, when and how do you start replacing mods? Once you have 3 mods on a unit, when do you look and say, well, I need to start upgrading my mods? And some of that can be reactive towards what your opponent is doing. I think the right answer right now is actually you upgrade your mod when you need the power spike. So often in the games I play, again, they tend to be more rapid. You tech into the unit you want, then you tech into some mods for that unit, and then your decision becomes, do I tech further down the tree of what I was going for? So if I was, Vanguard Promethean, maybe I tried to go for Purifiers. So I got Purifiers, I teched into some mods to throw on them. I'm starting to build them now. And then the decision is, well, do I go for Aegis tanks, or do I start trying to get really great mods on that unit instead, which is going to be an entirely different tree to push down. And when you start to get into, you have to make that choice, because whichever one you choose, you can't really do the other one. You just don't have the tech capability to go deep down the unit tree and go deep down the mod tree. And that, I think, depends specifically on your race and the tree you're trying to go down. So for Purifiers specifically, you're not going to go down the firearms tree because it's not a firearm weapon, I don't believe. Let me make sure on that. It is not. It's a plasma. So it's not a firearm weapon. It's also not a laser weapon because it's specifically plasma. So the only real mods are either to go deep down the Promethean mod line or to go deep down the Vanguard mod line. And jetpacks are cool, but launcher turrets don't help at all because it's only for engineers. Sequential kill system is very good, but if I'm going Purifiers, I'm probably going more wide. So I'm going with slightly cheaper units instead of really good units. And so the regaining action point is not as strong in that case because each individual Purifier is not as huge a contributor. And then by that point, if you say, well, this isn't useful and this isn't super, super useful, getting all the way down to here is a pretty big commitment to not be getting anything on the way. So I probably would not go for Vanguard mods. So then you look at Promethean mods. This you will have already guaranteed. This is pretty easy to get and pretty good to have. What are these starting to do? So this is pretty hazard immunity, bioresistance. That's a little more limited mod. It can be very useful in some cases, but not super useful in all cases. Absorption panels is very strong, but that's cyborg and mechanical, so that's no good for my Purifier core. And so now we're already down to here. Wind damaged. Okay, I would have to be in close melee, which I don't really want to super be doing with my Purifiers, but that might be useful depending on my opponent. And this is very good. Burning to go to immolation is very nice. So that might be worth doing. So there is an option to head down this way or to go for Aegis tank. So that is a real decision to have to make. But that is the decision. So if you are deciding between going units or going mods, that is when you decide if you have to upgrade. So the decision is not so much of when do I upgrade my units. The decision is if I'm going for mods over units, I have to upgrade. If I'm going for units over mods, I don't. And probably never will. So upgrading is also painful because you're losing out on investment. But it's often hard to not upgrade because you want all units to be as individually effective as you can because you have a limited energy to spend every turn on upkeep. So I tend to think you're better off going for units than going for mods, but again, I still think we're in relatively early days for Planetfall, and it may very well turn out to be that the stronger case in certain builds, or maybe even the majority builds, is actually nope, you can be fine with just sticking to your relatively basic tier 1, tier 2 units, and instead going deep into the mod trees so that you can put really broken stuff on your units. So, alright, let me recap to myself what we've talked about with mods here. So we talked a little bit about the bottom half of the mod being very important and the first thing you're kind of considering when you're putting the mod on. We talked about how you need to make a decision for each unit or unit type on whether or not you want to have it, how many mods you want per unit type and what type of mod that's going to be. We talked about how the decision at that point then is which mods that you have available to fill those gaps, and I talked about how I don't think we're really at a position to know that super well yet. Like, I can't tell you for each individual mod. I just don't think we have that understanding yet, but I think the stacking you want to be concerned about is more the bottom half and not whatever the top half is right now. Obviously, there's synergies of, oh, you can put incinerate. Well, no, you can't, because I don't think... Does this work? Yeah, this is plasma only, so you can't put this and this on the same unit. But before I keep distracting myself, the top half one you consider more individually and not as much about how they will stack. There are some exceptions to that. I think mostly in the firearms of one extra range is always just good, and that's where if you're taking this, you're taking it because of the one extra range. You're not taking it because of the 10% increased damage. That extends a little bit, I think, in general to the damage ones, because 10% damage is just not quite as good as the one armor point or one shield point or raw HP. So the damage ones tend to have a stronger top half. Generally. So in those cases, you look a little more towards what the top half is giving you, but I still think you make the decision first on whether or not you wanted extra damage or extra survivability on your units. Excuse me again. After that discussion, we talked a little bit about when and if you should ever upgrade your mods, and again, I generally think that's the weaker choice. I think usually you just get set on the mods you want for the first unit that you're making, and then you start getting better units, and you kind of just sit tight on the mods you have until after you get those better units, and then in the late game is when you start pushing towards better mods. But again, as usual, I'm willing to be proved wrong. If someone can come in and say, no, I'm full of it. You definitely want to aim for this mod as soon as you can. But I just don't think that's there right now, in general. All right, let me check time. Where do we sit? Yeah. Okay. So I'm definitely at the time I should have ended talking. So I will not be going to Vanguard units so much. We'll try to do that in a future video sometime. In the meantime, as always, enjoy Planetfall. Have a good one.